we discuss about the main sources of finance and what are the main sources of finance and we also discuss about the long-term sources of finance, type of finance, what are the internal and external sources of finance, which is very important topic nowadays. Like sources of finance for economy of any country or any institution or state, that sources of finance for if we discuss about business or equity, debt, debenture, retained earnings, term loans, working capital loans, letter of credit, fundings. These sources of funds are used in different situations. They are classified based on time period, owned and control, and their source of generation. And the sources of business finance are retained earnings like equity, term loans, debts, letter of credit, debentures, euros, working capital loans, and venture fundings are used as a sources of finance. And if we discuss about the best funding sources which are used currently, like traditional bank loans, small business administration loans, and then business credit cards and other investors, is the main sources of finance. And first we discuss about what is finance. The finance means it's money used to purchase things the business needs to want. And what are the main sources of finance? When we discuss about the main sources of finance and what is the source of finance, it is a method of getting hold of the money you need. Sources of finance are the most explored area, especially for the entrepreneur, businessman, business owners about to start a new business. It is perhaps the toughest part of the all the efforts of any person or any business owner. If we discuss about the various sources of finance which are classified on the basis of time period, ownership and control, and source of generation, which are the main finance sources. According to the time period, sources of finance of business are classified based on the time period for which the money is required. And time period are commonly classified into the three main time periods or sources of financing in the business. And the first one source of finance is long term sources of finance, then second one medium term sources of finance, and the last one is short term for sources of finance which are used as a sources of financing for any business or any institution. And in long term sources of finance, which is the first one source of financing, where we discuss about share capital or equity shares, then preference capital or preference share. Third one is retained earning or internal accruals are used as a long term sources of finance. Then debenture or bonds, long terms or long term loans for financial institutes, governments or commercial banks. Venture funding, asset scrutinizations, international financing by way of euro issue, foreign currency, loans, ADR, DDR, and many other financial institutions which paid long term is the long term sources of finance. If we discuss about the medium term sources of financing, in medium term sources of financing we use preferred capital or preference shares, debenture or bonds, medium-term loans from financial institutions, governments and commercial banks, lease finance, and hire purchase finance are used as a medium-term sources of finance. The third one source of finance is short-term sources of finance. In short-term sources of finance, we use trade credit, short-term loans like working capital loans from commercial banks, fixed deposits for the period of 1 year or less, advances received from customers, creditors, payables, fac- factoring services, bill discounting are the short-term sources of finance. And according to the ownership and control of financing, where the sources of finance are classified based on ownership and control over the business, these two parameters are an important consideration while selecting a source of finance for the business or any entity. On the basis of ownership and control, sources of finance are classified into two main sources of financing like owner capital and borrowed capital. And when we discuss about owner capital means it's a equity capital, it's a preference capital, and retained earnings are included in owner capital. Convertible debentures are also included in owner capital. Venture funds and private equity are included in owner capital. And when we discuss about the borrowed capital for any business entity, we use financial institution as a borrowed capital, commercial banks or general public in case of debenture are used as a borrowed capital in any company or any business. According to the source of generation of financing, according to the sources of generation and source of finance are classified into two main types. The first one is internal sources and second one is in external sources of generation of finance. And when we discuss about the internal source of financing or internal sources of finance, we use as we used internal sources as a retained profits of any organization or institution or any business. And second one, internal source is reduction or controlling of working capital. We deduct or reduct the or control the working capital of any organization or any business. And the third one, internal source of financing is sale of asset. Sale of asset of any organization are also used as an internal source of financing. And for external sources of financing, the first one external source is shares. We issue a share of organization. And second one is debenture. Third one is public deposit. And fourth and last one, external sources is loans of the sources of financing. And what are the main conclusion of the financing? Like deciding the right source of finance is a crucial business decision which are taken up by top level finance manager or director or CEO of any organization. And when wrong source of finance increase the cost of funds, which in turn would have direct impact on the feasibility of project under concern. That means the project which are under concern or which are under construction have a greater impact on the sources of financing. And if improper match of type of capital with business requirement may go against smooth functioning of the business when the source of financing is not up to the mark, and if the source of financing not fulfill the complete requirement of the business, then it's not fruitful for any business. And best borrowing from bank or any other institution is an important source of finance to the companies. and bank lending is still mainly short term, although medium term lending is quite common these days. And short term lending may be in the form of an overdraft, which a company should keep within a limit set by the bank.